Cool. Hi, my name's Simon for Insert Past Upon here, and today I'm here with Mike MacDee. Say hello.
Hello again, Internet. We seem to keep bumping into each other.
Nice, nice. That's probably the best introduction I've had on the show so far. I like that one.
I didn't know if it was going to fall flat or not.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I laugh at everything. We're fine.
Oh, well, then this will be really easy.
Yeah. No worries. So let's kick it off then. So let's start with tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, God. Where to start? I'm a writer and an artist and a game designer. I do a little bit of everything because I get bored easily, I guess. I don't know. Or I'm overproductive. I've been writing and drawing since I was 3. The first story I remember writing and drawing was I might have been 4 or 5 at the time, really. And it was about these two guys in robot suits having an arena duel. This like the best thing you could possibly have for your first story ever as a kid. And I can't remember the hero's name, but the villain's name was Spike. But again, I was like 5, and I spelled Spike incorrectly. I spelled it like a particular racial slur, and, which my Latino babysitter thought was the funniest thing on the planet. So
That is awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah. And
My
then
nieces keep coming out with stuff like that, and it makes me die inside every time. I love it.
well, my parents are elementary school teachers. My dad's retired, but my mom still teaches first grade, and she'll every once in a while she gets like priceless shit like that. Like I remember she got this one. I will never forget. I think I scanned it, so I would always just to have it immortalized. The assignment was to write 2 or 3 sentences about yourself, about something you saw over the weekend or something you did over the weekend. And this kid and I put this in one of the creepypasta, the horror stories I put online actually. This was an actual thing. The kid's assignment was he said, I have 2 dogs, they like to wrestle. And the picture he drew was this first grade crayon rendering of one dog humping another. I have 2 dogs like to wrestle. Even better, that week had parent-teacher conferences, and Mom got to show it to the parents. They turned beet red.
That is brilliant. That is brilliant.
So yeah, kids do really funny stuff. I've worked with a class on occasion. Every couple of years, I'll go in there like the last couple months of school, and I'll come in and help out and meet the kids. And it's always pretty fun, mostly because I don't have to do it every day.
Mm. Yeah. Kids are great in moderation, but I don't know if I could deal with one all the time.
It's great because you don't have to take them home at the end of the day. Someone else takes them away, and then you're done. You go and do other things. You can continue to have a social life. But yeah, so I've been writing, drawing, or both for a long time. I did a webcomic, I should say, past tense, called Daddy's Girl. It was like a martial arts family drama thing.
Nice.
It's on its second run on Tapastic, or tapast.io is what it's called now. Because the first time I did that comic, I was updating as I drew the pages on Smack Jeeves. And it didn't really get much exposure, so now now I'm just updating daily because it's like a 260-page comic. So I've been able to update daily for the past year, and now it's actually getting a little exposure, so that's nice. Like people are actually reading it and talking about it a little bit. But I started off the first time I got anything like published in public in any format was I'd specialized as a horror author because I was trying to improve my craft, and I read somewhere that like the best and quickest way to become a decent writer is to specialize in one particular genre. So I guess because then you don't worry about what you're going to be writing. That's out of the way, and you just focus on how to do it as best as possible.
Yeah.
And then everything you learn from writing a lot in that genre you can apply to new genres. So I chose horror, and I wrote horror for like 10 years, and I ended up with like 20 odd short stories and novellas and such. And I kept trying to get them published, and nobody would take them. So finally, I decided, fuck it, I'll just post them online and call them creepypasta, even though they aren't technically creepypasta. Because like the definition of creepypasta, I think, really is like this really short little thing that you can share in an email. So that just happens to be really spooky and tends to kind of blur the line between like real and fiction, maybe, I don't know, depending. And I'm basically just doing like proper horror short fiction and posting it on the net, but whatever. So I posted this, my first story I submitted to what used to be called the Creepypasta Archive, I think. I think it's now called creepypasta.com. Or it used to be two different sites and they merged together. I don't know, but anyway. So back then it was called the Creepypasta Archive, and I submitted it to them. I never heard back, so I was like, "Yeah, this is just like the magazines. All right, well, whatever." And then a year later, I find the Creepypasta wiki. I'm like, "All right, we can just upload whatever here. Maybe I'll just upload some of my stuff here." Come to find out, the story Whispers that I submitted to Creepypasta Archive was already on there. And I was like, "Wait a minute. That means somebody's actually heard of something I wrote and they put it up here." So I go back to Creepypasta Archive. Sure enough, it's up there and it's got like really high ratings and a bunch of comments, and it's popped up on a bunch of people's like creepypasta blogs.
Nice.
So it's like this prodigal pasta that like went out and it came back and was like, "Hey, I kind of generated a following." Well, not really a following, but like people have heard of me, So that's a start. So then I went on the wiki and I claimed authorship because it was like anonymous at the time, and I posted all the rest of my stuff on there, and that was the first time I really got anything like technically published anywhere, was on the Creepypasta wiki. Well, on Creepypasta Archive, and then Creepypasta wiki from there. So I host all my spooky stories on there because nobody will publish them anyway. And since then I've published a book, and I've self-published several other books. And I'm not really a prolific author by any stretch of the imagination, because like the hardest part of getting published is getting people to actually notice you. And I haven't really succeeded in that regard yet. Beyond a couple of good and several mostly bad like readings of my creepypastas online. That's the extent. And getting kicked out of a couple of Facebook writing groups. That's the extent of my fame, really.
That's it. You've made it big when you're getting kicked out of groups. That's
yeah. Jesus, don't even get me started on that.
No. So this
they were the creative writers group and the fiction writing group on Facebook. By the way, if you want to know which groups to avoid for oversensitive like user base, yeah, stay away from them. Basically, just don't join writing groups on Facebook is what I'm saying.
Right.
Like, it will not matter how much useful advice like you give to people. You say one little thing that somebody doesn't like, they'll kick your ass right out.
Oh, wow. No. So like the first story you wrote then, the Whispers, you said it was.
Yeah.
Do you think it was any good?
It was okay. I mean, it was.
I'm always curious to know what people thought of like their first foray into it.
It was good enough, I guess, that Midnight Marinara contacted me. Their YouTube channel, who do really cool little radio drama productions of various horror stories on the net.
Yeah.
But they're actually nice enough to ask the authors first and say, "Hey, we want to do a radio drama of your story. Would you be all right with that?" Instead of just doing it and assuming that copyright doesn't exist. And I was like, "Yes, absolutely," because I'd seen some of their stuff and they were really good. So they did. They did a really good reading of that story. And then later they took one of my bad stories and riffed on it on the Undercooked Analysis podcast, which was really funny.
I think we've all been there. But...
Yeah, it was the story Bathroom Anxiety. And
I heard that episode. I know that one.
Oh, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. It's like they point out like the main character, the teacher, Miss Hands, is basically like this fucked up rolled doll character, and they're voicing her like the Christopher Nolan Batman every time she has lines.
Yeah.
Do you want to lose your bathroom privileges? It's really funny. So.
Yeah, no, I like that. So that's a good one. So
Yeah.
So when it comes to horror, what sort of horror do you like to write the most? What sort of subgenre wise?
I don't know. I guess I don't know if you call it a subgenre, but a lot of the stuff I wrote was in epistolary style. It's, readers or listeners at home aren't familiar with the term. Epistolary refers to any story that's written in the form of like journal entries or letters or emails or whatever. So a classic example would be Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah.
More modern example would be like any creepypasta that's written in the form of a blog. So like Ted the Caver would be like a modern epistolary story. I don't know if it's really a subgenre. That's more of the style of writing, but I think half the horror stories I posted online are basically like that. But when I think a lot of the horror I like to do tends to be well, like Carbon River, like I'd sent you that one.
Yeah.
I don't really go for like shock value or gore like a lot of really bad creepypasta authors go for. And I definitely don't do creepypasta OCs because those are just garbage. Please do not write a story about your creepypasta OC because it's not going to end well. If you absolutely have to, do not make them the central focus because that's not how horror works.
Oh.
You know, it's like the original Hellraiser was not about Pinhead and the Cenobites. It was about, you know, this girl and her creepy ass uncle who was trying to come back from the dead.
Yeah.
And the Cenobites were like a plot device. You know, that's how horror works. You know, the scary thing is not the main character. It is the thing that pushes the plot forward. Please do that.
That's it. One day.
A lot of the stuff I do, I try to you know, do proper horror fiction. I try to have like the spooky elements in the background, and it's more about like how it affects this regular person who just has it thrust upon them.
That's cool.
As for subgenre, I guess I don't really know the subgenres. There's a lot. I guess they're inventing a lot of new subgenres on the internet now, and I don't really buy into it.
That's fair. So, I mean, I know what you mean. It's nice not to have a label in many ways. So,
well, I don't want to be. I'm not trying to be like a hipster. I'm just like, I like to be labeled, man. You know, because I brought that to this town. No, because I love fucking genre fiction. You know, that's my favorite. That's part of what helped me realize what kind of author I was. Because like I was submitting stuff to these lit magazines. Apparently there's horror lit magazines. You know, figure that out. And apparently what I was actually writing was like pulp fiction. You know, so I'm basically a trash fiction author. So I'm like, all right, well, now that I know my audience, you know, let's just go with that. I know where to submit it now. So I try not to be pretentious about any stuff. You know, I don't. So I just write what I think is fun, and I try not to put any like deep hidden subtext or anything like that. You know, if people can find some in my work, you know, who the fuck are you? How did you do that?
No, awesome. So in terms of like other writers, I mean, who's it that's influenced you in terms of writers? Do you think?
Oh, geez, there's an awful lot. As far as writing in general, the essays of Kurt Vonnegut and having a brain fart, Mark Twain.
Yeah.
Really influenced me because they really understood the craft and how to use it correctly. Which is funny because I hadn't really read any of their actual fictional works. I just read their essays because that was what really interested me. Raymond Chandler also wrote a really great essay on writing and writing murder mysteries and such. But they really talk about the craft like they know what they're doing. And there's a lot of useful things like don't worry about writing in a particular voice because your natural author's voice will develop over time. Because essentially, I think it was Twain that likened your author's voice as a house built from the bricks of other authors' houses. So like you go through life reading all these books by all these different authors, and you find something that you like, and you take a brick from their house and add it to yours. And if you find that there's something you don't like about that author, you leave that brick alone, you know. And eventually, you have your own brick house built from the houses of these other authors, and it makes your own distinct voice. Like H.P. Lovecraft was hugely influenced by Poe and Chambers. He considered himself just a Poe and Chambers emulator. He didn't think he had any original work. But that's the ironic thing is like combining the two through Lovecraft, we got this new original thing. And he never realized that, or I guess he maybe did, but he was very humble about it. I don't know.
Yeah, it all seems to come back to Lovecraft. Like every interview I do, he always gets in there somewhere.
Yeah, as far as horror fiction, my big influences were Stoker and Lovecraft because they really kind of pointed me in the right direction. Yeah. And there were some internet authors that wrote some stuff that influenced me a lot too. Even though I don't recommend using internet horror fiction to learn how to write proper horror fiction, because 99 times out of 100 you're going to get bad examples and develop bad habits from it. It's like you want to learn, you want to read books instead of like fan fiction and creepypasta, please. If you're a new developing author, because there's actually quality control there, and those authors tend to know more what they're doing. They tend to know better than internet authors do. So, but you can learn stuff from the really good internet authors as well. Like the trick I picked up from Dianea House was you can increase tension with a lot of really short statements as you're describing the action.
Yeah.
I tend to do that when I describe a lot of really tense moments. I tend to use a lot of short statements because the stop and go kind of builds a sense of tension, and that's been used in literary works as well. I can't think of any off the top of my head.
But no, I know what you mean.
Other authors influenced me in general. I want to say Dashiell Hammett was a big one, because I never liked describing things in great detail. Like I'd read stuff like Ian Fleming, and he just goes overboard describing, like, I don't give a shit what that's the minutest detail of what Bond was having for breakfast every morning. That's I don't care about that, and I don't want to write that, and I don't want to spend 3 pages describing the lawn. Yeah. And Hammett would just tell you the details you needed to know, and then he would move on. So all his books are very short because they're very sparsely detailed, but he tells you exactly what you need to know about the characters and about the setting and whatnot. And he manages to convey in a very economical way, the setting and the characters and the tone and such. And that probably influenced me more than anything, partly because I don't like writing fluff, and partly because I have a short attention span.
Yeah. Well, I definitely know that feeling.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'd say, in which case, I mean, let's have a look at the story of yours that you sent over. Now, the story you sent over, as we said earlier, was Carbon River.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do for people listening is, as always, I'm going to put a link to it in the description for this video. So I say, please read it first. That way we can get really spoilery, and people will know what we're talking about.
And please read it before listening to any audio drama versions of it, because that's what you should always do before you listen to an audio adaptation anyway.
Yeah.
But also because I like I said, most of the readings on the YouTube are pretty bad. So you don't want your first exposure to anything to be a really shitty YouTube reading that was made just for the sake of hits. Although, to be fair, Madame Macabre, she did a 3-part reading of Carbon River, and the first part was pretty solid. She did some really great voice work with it. Like she did the voice of these. The Carbon River revolves around these 5 teenage girls, and she did the voices for all 5 of them, and all 5 of them sound completely distinct. And you would swear that you'd swear that she brought at least 1 or 2 other people in to help her with the voice work, but she didn't. She did it all herself. It was pretty awesome.
Nice. That's cool. Well, in which it's just now we've given out the warnings and stuff. Give us an overview of the story then.
So essentially, Carbon River takes place around Carbon River Ranger Station on Mount Rainier. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm probably butchering it. It's during the winter, so these 5 teenage girls who've been friends since like junior high, they're about to graduate and move on to college, and it's implied that some of them are moving away, so their little Hellraisers Club, as they like to call it, because they're a group of troublemakers, is basically going to be broken up, and they're not going to be this little social clique anymore. They're going to move on with their adult lives now. So this little camping trip is supposed to be their last hurrah, because 2 of the girls are sort of rangers in training, and that's something they've really been interested in. It's something their parents did. So they went up to have this little snowy camping trip on Mount Rainier National Park to sort of like have one last hangout and spend time together, isolated from everything else, and before they graduate, and then they probably never see each other again. And they get snowed in, so their little weekend camping trip turns into a we'll leave whenever the roads are opened up again, so we're stuck here for probably a couple of weeks because the weather's just gotten really bad. It's this really bad blizzard, and one by one, the girls sort of start disappearing, and the rest, and it's sort of a group paranoia thing. I was like, where the hell are they going? What the hell's going on? And they're trying to figure out what to do. And exacerbating the problem is Bly Bearhart, one of the American Indian girls in the group, had been telling them stories about American Indian legends. And they start thinking that maybe there's something supernatural going on because they're kind of in American Indian territory, and it's likely that some sort of a spirit might be involved, but they're not really sure.
Got ya. That's cool. That's it. I
don't know how much I don't know how much if you want me to like give a summary of what happens, or like how spoilers you want me to be.
It's completely up to you, really. I'd say we've given people warnings, so I mean we can, we don't have to give away the ending or anything, but like you can as much as you want, basically.
Okay, so it's spoiler warnings already given.
Yeah.
Essentially, the creature they think that's caused the blizzard and is trapped in there and is snatching them away one by one is a Wendigo. And by the end of the story, the last character realizes, yep, they were right, is a friggin' Wendigo, and they basically none of them survive. And but the thing I think I did pretty well with this story, and the reason it's one of my favorites is because you don't really see anything scary. Like the only scary thing you actually get to see is it's basically when one of the girls vanishes. Well, we'll say the first girl that vanishes is Shauna, and she was going to the ranger station to find her dad because nobody was picking up at the ranger station when they called them. So she went to the ranger station, and then Bly goes out to fix the generator. She comes back and pulls the other girls out. It's like, hey, would you guys come and look at this and tell me I'm not crazy? So they're like, all right, fine. So they go outside and look, and Shauna's footprints get about 20 feet from the edge of the woods, and then they just stop. And she's just nowhere to be found. And that's like the only really scary thing that you actually see in the story, and the rest of it is just like implications and aftermath. And you never really even see the monster until the very end. So a lot of it is about like what's between the lines and the characters' reactions to what's going on. Rather than actually seeing anything scary. There's no, chase through the woods or gore or anything like that.
Yeah. I must admit, I'd say this as you on really did tick a lot of boxes for me. It really put me in the mind of sort of 80s to 90s monster movies, almost sort of horror movies. In that you got the cabin in the woods, the teenagers. You've got the sort of the build up of tension with the big release at the end. I mean, is that what you were going for? Or?
Yeah, there's definitely some influence there. This might have been one of the first scary stories where I was just trying to do something spooky and fun and not trying to worry about, is there any sort of deeper meaning to this, or, trying to be literary about it. This was just like pure popcorn spooky fun, but without turning it into slasher territory. And that was one of the troubles I had was I basically set it up like a creature feature from the 80s. Just like 5 teenagers trapped, isolated from civilization, and there's a monster picking them off. How do I do this in a way that isn't stale? And one of the things I did was like I said, I don't show any gore, any scariness. I just kind of a lot of it is tension and paranoia, and these poor girls having no idea what the hell's going on and watching them kind of lose their minds as things get progressively worse. And the other thing was. The cast dynamic, I think, really makes the story, which I'm pretty proud of. Each of the girls is pretty distinct, and they all contribute something to the group dynamic, and they all try to do something to help solve the problem, or at least none of them are really just like, there's no reason for this character to be here. They all kind of contribute something to the group dynamic. And my favorite is Gretchen, because when you see these sorts of monster movie scenarios, you always have the asshole of the group.
Yeah.
And the asshole of the group is basically always just there to be the juiciest kill towards the end of the movie. And that was one of the things I wanted to turn on his head. It was like, all right, how do I make this not stale? Well, let's make the group asshole the protagonist. So it turns out the biggest asshole of the group is also the one who always got them out of trouble. Because they share some anecdotes about hey, remember that time we were all pissed drunk and Bly didn't have her license and she was driving because I was too drunk to actually drive, and then we got pulled over and we were trying to figure out what to tell the cop, and then Shauna and Nicholas, whatever his name, started fucking in the back seat, had no idea what the hell was going on, and I don't even tell how Gretchen got them out of that situation, but I imply that Gretchen was the one that got them out of that situation because she was the one who was always able to get them out of trouble by being essentially having the boneheaded resolve and like being really logical and just like not settling for any bullshit and you can see it right when everyone starts to panic. Gretchen's the one that's got her shit together.
Yeah.
Now Bly's pointing to the Shauna's footprints just suddenly stopped in the snow. I was like, I'm not crazy, right? What did she do? Flap her arms and fly to the ranger station? I was like, it's a Wendigo. I'm telling you, it's a Wendigo. Stop it. And Gretchen's like, stop it. All of you are going crazy. Y'all let Bly put these spooky Indian stories in your heads, and now they're running away with your tiny little ape brains. She's down at the ranger station. Snow covered up, fell from the trees and covered up her footprints. It's like a 10-minute walk to the station. Let's just go and we'll find her and then we'll bring her back. And if not, we'll just come back and we'll wait for somebody to come by. It's like she's being purely logical and like not settling for any of the spooky bullshit. She doesn't really get caught up in the spooky bullshit that's actually going on until near the very end.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I'd say, I mean, that was one of the things I wanted to ask. Cause, I mean, you speak of like them being of the group as such. I mean, how did you go about create? Because it's a very believable group dynamic that you've sort of created. It's a very realistic set of friends. Like I've known groups, I've been in groups of friends like that. How did you sort of go about writing that sort of play between them?
Honestly, I'm not sure. It was one of those cases where the characters sort of wrote themselves. Like once I figured out I figured out it's like, all right, there's 5 of them, and everybody has that group of friends where like, this is the asshole, this is the useless one, this is the childish coward, this is the down to business one, this is the sweet one, and then just kind of and then they just kind of started writing themselves from there when I was figuring out their interactions. So I'm not really sure how I started that out, because I didn't really do character profiles for any of them or anything. I just kind of started writing the dialogue and let them write themselves as that developed.
That's fair.
I knew in the back of my mind a couple of things. Like I knew that Bly was going to seem like the level-headed one until the spooky shit started happening, and then that was going to be one of the twists. Was the toughest one in the group ended up not being that tough after all. She's the first one to start panicking. Yeah. And that the alpha bitch of the group was going to be the one that would actually survive to the end and like try to keep the group together. But apart from that, it just sort of, the dialogue would start writing itself, and I'd be like, all right, well, why are they saying this to each other? And then I'd sort of develop their backstory and the relationship from there. Is like, okay, so Gretchen and Shauna are always kind of at odds because Shauna's trying to be the nice one and Gretchen is the mean one, but she loves her friends, but she expresses it in this mean way, and Shauna can't always take it, and then Bly gets pissed off at how she treats everybody, and it just sort of kind of snowballed from there. Nice. So I wish I could say like that there was some sort of a plan, and character outlines to it, but it wasn't. I just being in so many being in so many social groups as an observer, I watched so many of these little dynamics kind of play out and kind of figure out, all right, that's this person fulfills this role in the group, this person's this role, and that's how they all work together. And they seem like they hate each other, but they actually, they have kind of a love-hate relationship. And they just express it really in a really immature way. I don't know.
No, for sure. But I think that's half what makes it sort of so believable is that, I don't know, it might just be me, but I haven't had a single group of friends where anyone really goes, oh, I actually quite like you. It's always, you're an idiot and you're a douchebag, and and the reason I'm saying this is because I like you.
because we've been together for so long that like we can be honest with each other. We're no longer trying to win each other over. We've now won each other over, and now we're just tolerating each other.
Yeah.
And it's I think I guess a little bit had to do with how my high school clique interacted too, because I think that might have something to do with how people interact with each other when they've known each other since high school.
Yeah.
Or when they know each other in high school. Because your high school friends tend to bring out the worst in you.
No, that's fair.
I don't mind.
But so with the story, I mean, where did you sort of start it as such? I know a lot of writers I've spoken to tend to sort of start at the end and then sort of build up to that. I mean, where did you start with this one?
That's the weird thing, because I had a couple of possibilities for the ending. for this story, which is part of the reason I kept everything in the background and didn't like blatantly show a monster snatching them up and stuff. It was because I had the choice between either it was actually a monster or the first idea I had, which was it was actually one of the girls revenge killing her friends for something terrible that they had done to her years before.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of implanting the idea of the Wendigo legend was that, you know, the original idea of the story was that they were going to let their minds run away with this monster theory, and then at the end they realized it wasn't a monster, it was Shauna. She's pissed at us and she's killing us all, and that's why she invited us up here.
Yeah.
But I kept it open in case I decided to make it a monster story after all, and I'm glad I did, because when I decided this isn't really going to work, let's see how it works with an actual monster, it was so much scarier and so much better. So I just left it with the Wendigo. So originally I kind of had the ending. I guess I sort of started with the ending. I didn't write the ending, but I had an idea of where I was going. It's just I had two different options. And the monster option ended up being more fun and much easier to write, and a much better reveal anyway, because I don't know how many people would have bought that it was one of the girls, you know, because I would have had to really like outline exactly why and how one of the girls was doing this to her friends. Whereas if it was a monster, I don't have to worry about that. It's just a straight, fun, popcorn, spooky story for Halloween or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's more fun in the long run because I'm not having to think about it as much. I'm just enjoying myself, and other people are hopefully enjoying themselves as they read it.
Well, I think that's always part of it, isn't it? Is if you're enjoying yourself when you're writing it, it almost seems to come across in the writing almost.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I'd actually I kind of started out to write. My big influence growing up, which sort of got me into writing horror in the first place, was two series of spooky storybooks for youngins. The Scariest Stories to Tell in the Dark is the obvious one for like really young kids. But the one not as many people know about is the Scary Stories for Sleepovers series, which is more young adult. And if you know that's my biggest horror influence as a writer going in to any of my stories, you can totally see it. Because like most of the spooky stories I have written are like adult-oriented scary stories for sleepovers, because they're structured the same. Especially Carbon River and the Laughing Desert and a couple others I can't think of off the top of my head. But they're structured like adult-oriented scary stories for sleepovers entries. And all those stories just ended badly for the protagonists, and they were really fucked up. And the books kept me up for weeks when I was a kid. You know, I lost sleep. These books scared me so badly, and that's why they're always near and dear to my heart. And there was a story in the first volume. I can't remember what the title. I think it was something generic like a camping trip or something like that, or it was the name of the camp, Camp Colby, I think.
Yeah.
No, that was the mining one. Anyway. People this teacher took his class on a camping trip, and he was showing them around, and they bump into this ranger while they're on their hike through the woods, and the ranger explains like, yeah, this is my crossbow, and that's the ranger station up there. If you guys have any trouble, just come let me know. And like, all right, cool, yeah. And then they go and they set up camp, and the teacher tells a scary story about something in the woods, in those very woods, that kills people and such, and kill a bunch of campers, you know. And the kids are like, "Wow, that was really spooky. Hey, you think that's a real thing?" And then the next morning, one of the kids is missing. So it's like, all right, let's everyone form parties and we'll go find him, you know. And then they form parties and then they meet back up, and then someone else is missing, and they're like, all right, you know. So these kids start disappearing, and the teacher's like, all right, look, I'll go and I'll get the ranger and I'll tell him what's up. You guys stay in the camp. Do not leave the camp. And then the teacher's gone for a while, and then the two main kids are like, dude, what if he's the one killing all of us? You know, what if it's not a monster? What if it's this fucking teacher? You know, that's why he brought us out here, because he kills kids. It's like, well, maybe we should follow him, make sure he's going to the ranger, and then if he's not going to the ranger station, we'll know that he's the one doing this. All right, so they go to follow the teacher. And then at the end of the story, they bump into the ranger again, and they see blood. And he smiles at them. They're like, Mr. Ranger. And then they realize, oh shit, he's got blood on his crossbow. He's not actually the ranger. He's some serial killer who killed the ranger and took his clothes. And he's just killed our teacher. And now he's going to kill us. And that's where the story ends.
Nice.
and I was like, all right, I like that idea. I want to kind of do my own spin on it. And that's where Carbon River started. And then I realized a monster is going to be way more fun. So I just dropped all the pretenses and just kind of did my own thing with it. And then it really kind of came into its own from there when it was no longer like trying to do my own version of this. Because I tried something like that before and it didn't really turn out too well. I tried to do my own version of the story Harold from the 3rd volume of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark about the two farmers. You know the story I'm talking about?
No, I haven't actually read that. We had different stuff over here.
Okay, so the story Harold, it's people who have actually read these books know exactly what I'm talking about because it's easily one of the scariest stories in the entire anthology. These two farmers are bored out of their minds because they take the cows out into the hills to graze and such, and then they stay out there for like a couple of weeks, and then they bring them back in, and then they stay on the farm for months, and it's this really boring life of work and nothing going on. So they decide, let's build a dummy. Let's build a scarecrow. You know, we can put him out in the fields when the crops are growing, and then when it's winter time, we can bring him inside and we can fuck around with him. Who knows? You know? So they build this straw dummy, and they make it in the likeness of this farmer named Harold that they really don't like. And because it resembles Harold, they start abusing this dummy and slapping it around and like smearing food on its face. They're having a bad day at work, they'll just kick the shit out of Harold. You know, so that he's kind of their punching bag. And then when the crops are growing, they put him out like a scarecrow and they bring him back in when it's wintertime, and they beat him up some more. And Harold starts to emit noises, and then he starts to get a little bit bigger over time, like he's growing. And then at one point, he just gets up and he goes out and climbs up on the roof and starts trotting back and forth like a horse on its hind legs, like this freaky ass farmer dummy filled with straw. Yeah. And then he climbs back, and he does that all night. And then come morning time, he finally climbs down and goes out to the furthest corner of the cornfield, and he just stands there and stares out at the horizon. And so these farmers by now are like, we need to get the fuck out of here. So like, all right, well, we'll take the cows out, you know, out into the valley, and we'll just figure out what to do from there, you know. But we'll be away from this fucking thing we've created, and we'll be fine. They get halfway out there, and they're like, "Shit, we forgot the milking stool. It's gonna be too expensive to replace. We got to go back." And so they're like, they draw straws to see who goes back to get the stools. And Thomas, I think, was the name of the farmer who lost out. He's like, "All right, you know, just go on ahead without me, and I'll catch up." And then he goes back to the farmhouse where Harold is, and the other farmer takes the cows over the next hill. And at the top of the next hill, he looks back at the house, and he doesn't see Thomas, but he sees Harold up on the roof, stretching out a fresh skin to dry in the sun. It's fucking freaky.
I'm gonna have to get my hands on this book. This sounds awesome.
Yeah, the books are notorious for the artwork being mostly the scariest thing about it, because they got this really freakish like Spanish artist. I can't remember where he's from or what his name was, but he had this fantastic like I want to say they were like ink and brush illustrations.
Yeah.
They look like the stuff of nightmares, and that's what most kids who read these books growing up remember from the books, is these horrifying pictures that went with these books. And I think they changed the pictures in more recent reprints of books, which is really fucking lame. It's like
today they don't know anything.
I know, right? It's like I was growing up and like Goosebumps was the big thing, and the kids in my class would be talking. I was like, "Did you read the latest Goosebumps? It was so scary." I was like, "Bitch, please!" Here, and I give them the first volume of Scary Stories for sleepovers. You know, the ones like with the camping trip and the shit that kept me up. And there's shit in there that would like, you know, keep kids up for weeks. I shit you not. Like if these kids that read Goosebumps had read any of these books, there would be no comparison. Like there's a story. Some of the stuff that happens in the stories, like Goosebumps has what? You know, like there's a story where everyone turns out to be a dog at the end the whole time. There's stories about haunted Halloween masks and spooky roller coasters. First volume of Scary Stories for Sleepovers. There's a story about a kid, a family of three, a mom and dad and their son, who move into a new house where the previous family, a mom and a dad and a son, were murdered horribly. And now the shadows of the house are haunted. Every time this kid goes to bed at night, the shadows start creeping up on him. So he has to keep his lights on. Because the shadows in his house are trying to kill him. Imagine being at that same age, reading a story about the shadows in your bedroom trying to kill you every night. You would never sleep again. And guess what? The shadows kill the whole family at the end.
That is awesome. Not even.
It's fantastic.
These are like. I'm gonna have to find this on Amazon or something. This sounds awesome.
Yeah, these are like the best scary story books for kids ever, because these will genuinely scare the shit out of them. You know.
Yeah. Cool. So, I mean, just move back to your story. I mean, I said the only other question I've got about your story is, I mean, she wrote this a little while ago. When is there anything you'd change about it now, looking back on it?
I don't think so. That's one of the reasons it's one of my favorites. Is I'm most proudest with how it only took me a couple of weeks to write, and it came out pretty solid, I think. It's not a really deep story. It's just a fun, spooky story that gets the job done. But it has believable characters who are pretty distinct, and I think it turns some conventions on its head, and it manages to be really fun and really scary without actually being gratuitous.
Nice. No, that's cool. Yeah, no, I definitely got that, and so I particularly enjoyed reading it. I'd say it was really good. So yeah, so to move on then to the other story sent over, the story you liked by someone else. So the one he sent over was Pale Luna.
Yes.
An absolute classic. I love this story.
Yes, this is like the one creepypasta about a quote-unquote haunted game that's actually worth a shit.
Yeah.
It's like every spooky video game story is in creepypasta is the same damn thing. And it was like, I went to a swap meet, and I got this favorite game of mine, and I started to play it, but there was something wrong. But I kept playing for no reason whatsoever. And it was haunted.
Yeah, no, completely. I know what you mean. So,
like I don't get the appeal. It's just it's like I can understand why, say, like the haunted Godzilla game, creepypasta is popular, but I don't think anyone else who likes it understands why it's popular. It's because of the fucking screenshots.
Yeah, exactly.
Because this guy invented, and even the screenshots, like nothing in the screenshots really meshes well. Like they're obviously fake. It's just he made some really cool custom sprites in these really terribly photoshopped fake screenshots. You know, it's like he could have gone, at the very least, he could have gone the extra mile and tried to keep everything the same resolution and color palette, so it would look like a Super Nintendo or look like a Nintendo game or whatever system it was supposed to be for. Like make everything look like it's a Nintendo game and have the same color palette and the same resolution and the same kind of art style. You know, so it would look like it came from this actual game that exists, but there's something kind of wrong with it. And even then, you know, all you really, I feel like doing that and then just having the story consist of, hey, I was writing a playthrough of this Godzilla game and something went wrong, and it's like, is this normal? Did anyone else experience this? Like, I'm going to post some screenshots and then just have a bunch of screenshots.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
That would have been more effective than what he did, because the actual story just goes on forever.
It's still going, isn't it? It's
no, I think it actually ended.
Oh, wow.
I hope. Yeah, it's like 100,000 chapters long, and like that's really the draw, I think, is like these cool sprites and the screenshots, but the screenshots aren't believable at all. You know, like I said.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
And even like the better ones, like Ben Drowned, I still don't get it. You know, I don't get the appeal. This. Like, if you have a spooky game, you know, you just stop playing it and throw it out.
No, this is it.
And, I mean, and even then, I don't know. Some of them, they read one on the Undercooked analysis of several episodes ago that was like a Pokemon themed one that didn't need to be a Pokemon video game story. You know, he's like describing all these spooky things happening in the game. It's like, you know, it would be spookier if this was actually happening. If this wasn't happening on a tiny little screen in a video game where you're perfectly out of harm's way.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the story, this stuff is happening. It's like, it still would have been better if this was just real. You know, I don't know. It's hard to explain. You'd have to read the story and then you'd see what I mean. But like, even if it absolutely had to be a Pokemon story, they could have made it like a Pokemon Go story and have like this stuff's actually happening, and the main character involved in game isn't in game. It's an actual person who also plays Pokemon Go and like runs their own little trainer station. Their whatever it's called. You know, that would have been, then there would have been some stakes involved because it was happening in reality and not just in a video game. But yeah, so it's like easily one of the worst genres in creepypasta in general, if not the worst.
Yeah.
Pale Luna is the closest you can get to like a quote unquote haunted game story that's actually good, because it's 100% believable. This actually could have happened.
No, totally. I mean, what in it do you think works well? What is it that sort of elevates it above Is it just the realism of it, or is there anything else for you?
The realism of it and the way. Well, spoiler warnings ahead of time because like we're gonna talk about the story in detail. If,
Oh, yeah.
if you guys also, it's like same as before. If you guys haven't read the story before, please go read it before we start talking about it because you owe it to yourself to read this story. It's brilliant and it's really short, so it won't take up much of your time. So the historical aspect of it, first of all, was really well done because I don't know that anyone's ever really written about that sort of thing, the disc swapping parties of the early 80s, which I wasn't even familiar with until I read the story.
Yeah.
Or like nowadays, you know, like people meet on the internet and they just like have what is it? BitTorrents. They have torrent sites where you could just torrent games and other software illegally and just download it. In the early 80s, there were disc swapping parties, so people would put games and other software on a floppy disk, and they'd meet up and they'd swap discs. The difference there being it's impossible to trace where the disc came from, which is another brilliant aspect of why this is a great little the thing that happened in the story. Essentially, the game in this is called Pale Luna. It's notorious for being an unplayable text adventure game, you know, and like it's basically a crap game. It's like people play it and there's like very few choices in the game, and then it doesn't seem like you can make any progress, so people would just give up and toss it out. But there was this one guy who decided there has to be more to this game, right? So we started through trial and error just fucking around with the game, trying to figure out what it's all about, and he managed to get to the end. And it turned out to be a kind of a interactive treasure map sort of thing. So he's like, oh, sweet, there's some buried gold in these such and such woods at these coordinates that the end of the game gave me. So he goes and digs up what was buried there, and it turns out to be the severed head of a young blonde girl. And then he calls the police, and they come in and and they check it out, and they realize, yeah, this girl's been missing for several years, and you know, and the rest of her body is never found. And then you get to the end of the story, and you realize what was going on, and you're like, oh my god. And you start going back through and looking at what you're doing in the video game and all the imagery and the details in the game. And you realize you're basically walking through this guy burying the severed head of this little girl.
Yeah.
You know, and then he gives you the coordinates of where it was so that somebody could eventually find her. You know, so it's basically this really great serial killer story where no one knows who did it. And there's no way they're ever going to be caught because the only evidence was found in a disc swapping party from the early 80s. There's this disc is traded so many hands with no possible way to trace it that there's no way this guy's ever going to be brought to justice. Yeah. So this girl's been missing and murdered, and they're never going to catch who did it. And it's horrifying and it's brilliant.
Yeah, completely. As I say, is one of my favourite creepypastas for the same reasons. I mean, it's when it gets to the end, it's just so brutal and bleak, and it just changes everything you thought about the story up to that point.
Yeah, and it helps that there's such a saturation of like really bad haunted game stories in creepypasta because that kind of sets you up for it to be a supernatural thing. So you're expecting a supernatural thing throughout the story, and then you get to the end and you realize this is so much better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
This could have actually happened. You know, someone could have done this in the early 80s and gotten away with it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, I mean, with the things it does, well, I mean, what do you? I mean, is there anything that you draw from this story that sort of influences your own writing? Is there anything that this story does that you wish you could do, or that you try and do?
I wish my writing was as well thought out as this. You know, it's just like because I don't know that I would even really call this like pulpy pulp horror or even creepypasta. Really, I mean, it fits the description of creepypasta in that it blurs that fantasy and reality thing where like you could believe this actually happening, but it's so well crafted that I really want to call it literary horror because it's a brilliant piece of work.
Definitely. Also, quite like, as far as I'm aware, I'm just checking now, but it doesn't actually have an accredited author. Credited to Ed.
Yeah, it's just credited to Ed, whoever the hell that is.
Yeah, exactly.
So Ed, whoever the hell you are, you magnificent bastard, kudos for writing this story because this is one of the best internet horror fictions on the internet by far. This is like in the top 5.
Exactly. I mean, and especially, I don't know when this first came about, but because I know it was quite complex, obviously back in the day to have to not put your name on it, but for someone to write something this good and not be like, yes, this was totally me.
Yeah.
It's always impressive. He's a bigger man than I am for sure.
I would hope that they would come and claim. And I haven't even checked. He might have a profile on the Creepypasta wiki, and he might have a whole bunch of other stuff on there that's equally good. I just haven't checked. But I mean, if he doesn't, please, claim authorship and put the rest of your stuff where I can find it, because I want to read it.
yeah, definitely. Cool. So, I mean, which case, it's all about sort of like the creepypasta scene in general. For you, what makes a good creepypasta when you're cruising the wiki or whatever? What is it? What makes a good one?
I mean, everybody's scared by different things, but that's really the main thing. Like, everyone seems to have a different definition of what creepypasta is these days, because it started off as just like spooky copy pastas. It's like these really short microfiction spooky things that you could share with people.
Yeah.
And then it graduated to like these things like Ted the Caver and Diana House, these like interactive spooky things on social media, sort of got lumped in with it, I think. And then that sort of became another definition or a subgenre of creepypasta. And then eventually nowadays it's just like any internet horror fiction, really. Although I don't know if I really believe that. I think honestly, I have a very jaded view of creepypasta, because I put it like a step above fan fiction, which isn't saying a whole lot.
Right. Yeah.
Quality wise, it's basically my definition of it is like really terrible internet horror fiction. If I find like a really good example of it, it becomes like proper horror fiction and not creepypasta. So that's unfortunately my jaded definition of it. But I think the proper creepypasta is essentially just like this quick, spooky little thing you could share with someone in an email or in a text message or something, because that's what it's kind of started as. But the ones that scare me the most are the ones like Pale Luna, where like I really get immersed, and it genuinely creeps me out. And if it can blur the line between fantasy and reality, so much the better. I know Ted the Caver is another favorite of mine, because that story's freaking me out before it even gets to like the supernatural element, because like caving is the most insane thing you can do, It's like, and he's like crawling through these cramped, horrible spaces where like he has to drag himself through these crevices by his lips and like push himself with his toes, and that's a bad, and shit else. And then he's including photographs of how cramped these spaces are and how like helpless he is. I'm like, no, why would you do this to yourself?
Yeah.
And then it turns out there's something in the cave. I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? But it starts off so naturally, like, you don't realize it's a scary story initially. Like, I mean, if someone tells you going in, it's like, it's really great, you should read it. It's really spooky. It starts off as this regular blog thing, and then it becomes something else, If I didn't know that going in, I wouldn't bother reading it, because I'd be bored with it. Really, I would be bored with it and fed up with the terrible writing within the halfway through the first post, because it is written like a caver's blog post. It's not written like someone who knows how to write.
Yeah.
To kind of make it as believable as possible. So
that's it. It's someone who knows caves. That's
yeah, it's someone who knows caves, not English, which makes it believable, and that's to its credit. But again, like knowing that going in, that's what makes me read it all the way through to the end, because then I can get immersed in it. But it's the same thing as with any other writing. If it's not written in a way that can immerse me, I'm not going to finish reading it, and I'm not going to get scared. If they front load it too much, or if it's built around this lame ass creepypasta OC that, oh, surprise, surprise, he wears a white hoodie. What do you know? Just like all the rest of them. And the whole story is just like the description of a character on the back of an action figure card. It's like there's no story here.
Yeah. That's it. I must admit, I thought of my very first creepypasta I see the other day, and one day Teeth Hands will see the light of day, but I somehow don't think it's going to be anytime soon until I can think of a decent story for him to come into.
Teeth Hands?
Oh yeah, it's like he's got hands, but they're like little mouths on them. Isn't that terrifying?
I mean, that's perfect for a troll pasta, though. It's like just the name really grabs your attention. It's like Teeth Hands. Okay, I've got to read this. What the fuck is this about?
Let's see how this plays out. But one day.
Yeah. I'm trying to think because I know I must have one story that I wrote that is as close as I've come to like making a creepypasta OC, and I can't think of what it is off the top of my head. But I'm sure I have one in there somewhere, and I'm sure I've stoned it.
I feel everyone should give it a go at least once, and never post it anywhere, and just have it for that.
Oh, I think I know what it is because the original version of the Darrow Curse that I wrote, that one I told you about, that's like for some reason people keep spreading around on Scriggler and Twitter. I don't know why that one and not any of the others, but I guess because it's Halloween themed. I originally wrote that as like a very typical slasher, like Jason ripoff slasher movie thing in high school, I think it was, and then later I revisited it and I was like, yeah, I could probably do something with this character that's actually good, you know. So then I rewrote it as like this kind of Halloween spooky story, and it turned out much better, to be fair.
Yeah.
But I think that's the closest I have to a creepypasta OC is Tommy Darrow. But if you haven't read that one, I guess you could check that out and see if you agree with me or not. It's like the closest I've come to my Candlejack or Jeff the Killer or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, this well, I guess what makes a good it's hard for me to say what makes a good creepypasta just because I don't because of my jaded view of what creepypasta is. I think what makes good horror fiction in general is you do a good job of establishing a sense of normalcy to immerse me into the story, so that when the abnormal things start happening, then I start to give a shit. You don't base your story around the scary thing. You never do that.
Yeah.
No successful horror film has ever done that. You know, it's like every Friday the 13th movie. Does it focus? Is Jason the star? No, he's the highlight, but he's not the star. The star is the dumbass teenagers.
Yeah.
And the better entries in the series, like part 2, I think is still the best in the entire series. Isn't about Jason. You know, it's about the child psychologist, you know, who kind of understands Jason a little bit, but still, you know, doesn't want to get murdered by him. You know, or like I said, Hellraiser or Candyman. Candyman's not about the Candyman. It's about the lady researching Candyman and how you know, if you try to disprove this urban legend, it's a threat to that urban legend's survival, and he's going to come and kill you to preserve himself. In the sense of self-preservation. That's what the story's about. You know, it's not about Candyman. It's about this lady researching him. You know, horror doesn't work without the human element. That's the whole point. And the human element doesn't work. You know, we can't be scared if we want the main character to die. You know, which is why most of the Friday the 13th movies don't work. It's because they're just douchebag teenagers that you want to die. And if I want the protagonist to suffer and die, then I'm not going to be scared. And then it's not horror. It's just, you know, a gore flick.
Yeah.
You know, I have to not want the characters to die or have anything bad happen to them. That's why things in like H.P. Lovecraft stories work so well, like The Shadow Out of Time. The Shadow Out of Time is about this college professor who gets mind swapped out of nowhere. He just loses the alien mind swap lottery, and these aliens mind swap with him. And this alien's walking around in his body for like 2 years trying to do research on humanity and Earth culture and such. Makes the guy look like a total fucking lunatic. His family completely disowns him. He loses his job. He ends up in an asylum. And then 2 years later, or like 1 year later, I think, the alien's like, all right, my work is done, and then swaps back. The guy comes, and they erase the guy's memory because he swapped with the alien, and so he's on the alien planet learning about their culture, but then they're like, all right, so it's time to swap back, and you can't have any memory of this, so we'll wipe your memory and then send you back. So as far as he knows, he blacked out and then woke up, and it's a year later, and he's in an asylum, and he has no job, and his life has been ruined. So the story's about the guy didn't do anything to deserve this. He wasn't like delving into any sort of secrets that were like forbidden to human knowledge. You know, he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't like tampering in God's domain or anything. He's just this random dude off the street. Had a loving family, you know, like 5 kids, a really good job in the university, and he just had that taken away by the supernatural force just out of nowhere. And now the whole story is about him trying to pick up the pieces and put them back together and figure out what the hell happened to me over the course of this year. Why did this happen? Why has my life been ruined? You know, you can feel for that guy immediately because he didn't do anything to deserve that. You know, so you need a sympathetic protagonist in horror, probably more than any other genre. Because if I don't care about the protagonist, I'm not going to be scared by anything that happens to them.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you need that grounding there to really make it hit home. So again, as
So
you
I
say,
guess that's the biggest thing then, yeah, for creepypasta or any horror fiction, just like, immerse me in the story and make me give a shit about the protagonist so that I'm actually scared when spooky stuff happens.
nice, cool. And so, in terms of like the scene in general, I mean, what are your thoughts on the scene in general at the moment? Because obviously it's sort of getting a bit more mainstream at the moment. You've got Channel Zero, you've got
Yeah,
various movie stuff coming out.
yeah, that makes me sad. I, I was sort of there when they were starting to make it more mainstream. Not necessarily for Channel Zero, but there was, well, I don't know, it might have been Channel Zero that was doing this because I thought M. Night Shyamalan was doing something similar, unless he's actually the backer for Channel Zero on Sci-Fi. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
He might be, because I think it was Sci-Fi was doing this at the time, but. They had an announcement on Wattpad. It was like a pairing with Wattpad. Like they were scouring, the Wattpad, but also the internet in general for the best creepypastas to like turn into this Twilight Zone-esque anthology series. And I thought, oh, this is a cool idea. Until like 10 seconds later, I realized they're not looking for the best creepypastas. They're looking for the most popular because they're the most marketable.
Yeah.
Which means they're looking for the worst creepypastas. So No End House, Jeff the Killer. Candle Cove's okay. It's kind of like it. There's not much to it. It's all right. It's not. I wouldn't call it one of the worst, but I wouldn't call it one of the best either. It could have been done better, but it's not Jeff the Killer. It's certainly not fucking No End House. Are you kidding me? The worst haunted house, the worst and most pretentious and most drawn out haunted house story imaginable gets to be serialized as a series. You're like nobody will touch Pale Luna or. Here, I'll bring up my account on Creepypasta Week because I listed off all the creepypastas I think are actually worth a shit. And I'll just read those off at some point so people at home can like write these down when I read them off and go read them because these are actually good creepypastas, believe me. These Abandoned by Disney, A Painting of a Clown, Funny Mouth, Disappear Hole, The Disappearance of Ashley, Kansas, Psychosis, We Don't Talk About Sarah, Stone Chambers, Timeout, On the Bus, Pale Luna, Support Call ID 100156-03. That's a mouthful. Billy's Wish, and Nancy's Goatman Story. That one's fucking brilliant. Maskey, My Dead Girlfriend Keeps Messaging Me on Facebook, Rabbits in the Creek, Normal Porn for Normal People, Leet Hacks. Any one of those is so much more deserving of adaptation for like a Twilight Zone. Take all of those stories, adapt them into a Twilight Zone-esque series. One episode per. All of them are more deserving than the stuff that they were actually picking. It's like the only one of those that's actually popular is Abandoned by Disney. That's like the only one that's popular and fucking deserves it. Maybe My Dead Girlfriend Keeps Messaging Me on Facebook as well.
I've been seeing that around a lot recently. I think
considering
it was out years ago, but
that one's fucking great. But yeah, these are all really great stories, and they're genuinely spooky. Like they range from spooky to outright terrifying, and the craftsmanship is so much better. Psychosis is like the iffiest one on this list, writing wise, but it had like a really good idea.
Yeah.
So that's that one. That one I think would be like ranked at the bottom of the list of all of these. But it still had an idea. It's like made me think that would actually be kind of terrifying, But yeah, all of those do a really good job of like presenting something and immersing you, and then like giving you chills. And the shit they're choosing for like adaptation that's actually popular is like Jeff the Killer quality, and it drives me out of my fucking mind. So that's my opinion on the state of the creepypasta scene in general. Is like these garbage stories are, and it makes sense that Sci-Fi would like choose the worst stories ever because they've been in the toilet for like 20 years anyway. But they've been in the toilet since they changed their channel name to Siffy.
Yeah. I know.
So yeah, that's my opinion of the state of things. It's like the most interesting thing that's going on right now is the Creepypasta Wiki is doing a fourth collaborative project, which shows promise. They've done 3 up to this point, and I hadn't actually joined one this time, so I'm actually joining this one. I'm not sure how good my entry is, but the theme is really interesting.
Nice. And so I mean, in your opinion, obviously, ideal world situation. Like, what could you do to fix it? What could you do to make it better? What does the scene need? Do you think?
Honestly, I think it's a sinking ship. I don't. It's like my thoughts on making creepypasta better would basically make me Plato, in that I'm currently Plato in that I'm projecting how things should be, and the more realistic thing to be is to be Aristotle, which is talking about here's how things are. We're gonna have to make the best of it. Yeah. So at the moment, creepypasta is the Titanic, and we're gonna have to just I guess keep playing with the band to keep everybody calm until everybody drowns. I don't know. That's my thoughts on it. It's like I don't think there is any saving it. It's like it's fan fiction. It's fan fiction level at this point.
Right. Yeah.
I do think it's a good. The one thing I'll say about it is I think it's a decent doorway for like new authors who want to try and get their name out there. If you're interested in horror fiction, you can use it as a gateway to sort of generate an audience. Just please try to treat it like actual like proper writing, and like, you know, don't read creepypasta and fan fiction if you want to actually be a writer of creepypasta or anything else. Read actual books, because when those books came out, they actually had quality control. Creepypasta and fan fiction does not. So all you can really hope to learn from fan fiction and creepypasta as a writer is bad writing habits. And there's a few really good writers that actually know what they're doing who are doing fan fiction and creepypasta, but the ratio of good to bad authors doing it is so ridiculous that you really can't rely on it. You'd be better off going with published works. And that's why they say on the Creepypasta Wiki, you know, read actual books, study actual successful authors and what made them successful. You know, they have whole pages on the Creepypasta Wiki with writing tips, you know, for poetry and fiction and such. You know, read that stuff. You know, don't use creepypasta and fanfiction as an example of how to be a writer. You know, use it as a gateway to build your author platform and like generate an audience. And then when you start publishing actual books, people will be like, "Oh, cool! I like your writing. I'm going to go do that." You know, that's it's like fanfiction. That's the most useful thing to any author it can be right now, because it's certainly not a place to go for quality work, unless you're really lucky and you find that odd diamond in the rough.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. And finding that diamond in the rough becomes this getting increasingly difficult now.
Yeah. If I think Rate My Poo is the perfect proof that shit is the standard of entertainment right now. That's like concrete evidence. Concrete evidence that shit is the standard of entertainment right now.
Well, that is great. Well, that's on that note, those are actually all my questions. So, you know, we might as well end on shit. So as I say, I mean, obviously, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me, especially for this long. I really appreciate it. And
thanks for having me on. I appreciate anybody who's willing to let me blather and talk their ear off for like an hour and a half.
Oh, it's anytime.
And deal with my jaded bullshit.
No, it's great. It's great. I love a bit of cynicism. It's brilliant.
So, I'm not saying people shouldn't write creepypasta. I'm just saying they should put some fucking effort into it. That's all. Please put effort into it. Don't write about a serial killer who wears a white hoodie. Please don't. Yeah. Or a haunted video game. Just like read proper fiction and like put some effort into your work, and you will, believe me, you will stand out. You'll stand out from the garbage if you do that. That's all it takes, is a little effort.
That's cool. So to finish off then, if you've got anything you want to plug, where can people find you? Anything like that, now's your time.
Anything I post on the internet or elsewhere, I post links to and updates about on mikestoybox.net. I can send you a link if you want. You can post in the video description.
I will do, yeah.
Yeah, I do like video game stuff. I do a lot of Doom mods recently because I love Doom. I play it all the time.
Yeah.
Video games I occasionally made from scratch. Stuff I've done on YouTube. Books I've written and published. Short stories. You know, any little thing. Comics. Whatever I do, I post links to it on mikestoybox.net. And it's all organized into various tabs and such. The most recent thing that I did that's noteworthy. I published the second entry in the Winter Agent Juno dystopian adventure series. If you like girls with guns during nuclear winter,
who doesn't?
Check out Kingdom of Famine. That's the second book in the Winter Agent Juno series that came out this past July, like July 16th. The story is essentially about this ex-military gal with an eye patch, the star of the first book, who gets word that her mother recently committed suicide. It's her estranged mother, so she hated her, but she's always kind of wanted to bury the hatchet with her, and now this is like her last chance to do it, so she figures. So she goes back to her hometown to bury her mother and bury the hatchet along with her. And in the process, she kind of gets bombarded by these elements from her past that she hasn't touched in years. Childhood crush. She gets reacquainted with her three sisters, which is really fun. And in the process, she starts to realize, maybe mom didn't commit suicide. She was involved with the bad people running my hometown. And then it turns to gunplay pretty quickly, and a lot of people die.
Sweet.
So it's very cool. It's very fun. There's some funny stuff involving a dog. If I'm good at anything, it's writing memorable characters, even the minor characters. So even if you don't care for the plot, you'll love some of the characters in this. I promise you'll like something about this book. It's a lot of fun. So please check it out, Kingdom of Famine. And Mike'sToyBox.net if you want to look at any other stuff. So I don't know. Was that pluggy enough for you?
That was great. That was great. I feel sufficiently dirty. That's brilliant.
I do too. I'm gonna go have a shower.
No worries. Well, I'd say thanks a lot for your time, man. And
thank you for having me.
I say you're welcome back. Welcome back anytime.
As always, it's the first time you've had me on there. All right, I'm gonna go take some Quaaludes and go to bed and see if that'll make my brain work. Because I cannot talk anymore.
No worries, dude. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, Simon. See you around.
So there you have it. Mike MacDee, everyone. I had a great time with this one, as you could probably tell by my incessant laughter all the way through. As always, check him out. I've read the stuff he sent over. I've started reading more of his stuff, and he's a great writer. So please go and check out the links below and read some of his other stuff. In terms of me, if you like these interviews, please like and subscribe. I thrive on like and subscribes, and of course, come to insertpastopunhere.com to see more of these, and obviously some of my own writing. And check us out on Facebook if you want regular updates. Facebook.com/insertpastopunhere. Thanks a lot for listening, guys, and I'll see you again very soon.